For the second exercise of session 5, we need to write a program which reads the name of the user from the keyboard. Then we want to display a greeting message dialog with the content welcome and then the name. We're also asked to make sure that our program does not crash when the user presses cancel or for long inputs. Instead, we should display an appropriate error message dialog. And if you haven't looked at the system call list yet, this might be confusing, but let's first take a look to see what this is all about. So, when we go look at read string, in this case, this is reading a string from the console, and this is going to be annoying to use because we have no way here of detecting whether or not we read too many characters, and there's also no cancel button when we're reading a string basically from the console. But we can also read a string using one of these dialogues. So input dialog string, and this is a system call we're going to use. So this system call displays a pop-up and requests the user for a string input. So the input here is A0, which will be the address of an auto-enumerated string, and this string will be displayed at the top of this input dialog. So, for example, please enter your name. Then A1 will be the address of the input buffer, which means the address to which the inputs that the user provides to the dialog will be written. So if the user provides 10 letters of input, then those 10 letters will be written to the address stored in A1. And then lastly, we give a maximum amount of characters that should be read. So if we enter 10 here, we can only read 10 characters. If more characters are input, well, let's see in the right column what should happen. So A1 as output will now contain a status value. So you provide it with the address of an input buffer, and as output, A1 will have a status value. 0 means okay. That means the address of the buffer itself now contains the string that was read, and the string that fitted within the maximum size. Everything is okay. That's perfect. If A1, however, is -2, the user chose cancel and didn't enter an input string. So the buffer hasn't been changed. If -3, OK was chosen, but the user didn't enter any data in the data input field. So he didn't enter a name, but he did choose OK. And -4 means that the user entered a string that was too long. So that's how we should use this input dialog string. And so that's the system call we're going to use. A different part, so 54. Now, instead display an appropriate error message dialog. So we have a greeting message dialog and an error message dialog depending on what happens. And both of these are also system calls. So you have a message dialog, and you can choose here for error, information, warning, question. And in A1 you specify what type of dialog you want, and in A0 you specify the address of the message that you want to display. Great. Let's put this all together and look at our solution. So we are interested in 54 and 55, these two system calls. So when we look at the solution, the first thing we see is we have defined a few strings. The string please input your name below, the string welcome, and the string input error. And then we will say we will store the user input string in this location, and we reserve 10 bytes. So that's going to be our maximum size of our string, 10 bytes. And the first thing we want to do is display this input dialog from the input dialog string. That's the first thing we want to display, system call 54. A0, the address of the message that we will display. A1, the address of the buffer, where we need to put a name. A2, the amount of characters that we want to read. A2 is obviously 10. A1 is then the address of user, because this is the buffer where we want to read our characters. And A0 will be this string. Please input your name below. And then we'll just call the system call. And then, when this is done, in A1, we will have a status value. And only if the status value is 0, everything was fine. If not, we had an error. So, if it is not equal to 0, we branch to error. And an error, we will display an error message. So how do we do that? By system call 55. And we show an error dialog by loading the value 0 in A1. So let's see, that should be, or apparently it should be the value 1 here. So let's see what that does when we actually execute this in a second. Maybe we should fix this to 1. And then on the other hand, if everything was okay, we simply here used system call 59, which was message dialog string. So to display two different strings. So message dialog string is useful because you can provide two strings and they both will be displayed. So a message followed by a string. That's useful because we have two separate strings here. We have a predefined string in the data section and we have the string input by the user himself. So A0 contains the address of the string, probably the one that you predefined, and A1 the address of the buffer of the second string. So let's see how we used it. So the welcome string, we put an A0, and A1, the string that the user had just input. So we have to load that address again in A1, because we overwrote that using this equal, because now A1 contained the status code. And then A7 we load the system call 59. And then we perform an equal. And that's basically it. All of these branch to exit. Exit just executes the exit system call to terminate the program. So let's assemble and run this. And we get this dialog. Please input your name below. If I just enter my name, information, welcome, Koba. Now let's make an error. Let's enter a very long string. And now we get this error message dialog. And I wonder if I make this into 1, because in fact the documentation here stated that there should be the value 1 for an error message. Let's see if this is correct. The documentation, it might be incorrect, we'll see. Maybe this has the same effect. And that's documentation seems to be wrong for system call 55. So this is something I could fix. And in fact, it's the value 0 you want to display an error. Might be fixed by the time you're doing this exercise session, if I think about it. Great. So also you could verify that if we just press cancel, we get the input error message. And if we press OK, we also get input error. So this is the solution to this second exercise. Simply, the main challenge here was simply reading different system calls and figuring out how they work, what to do, how to use them, and so forth.